The classic one we know about is the patellar reflex. That's when you get the doctor come with that Dawn hammer and fire on it right underneath the kneecap, and then, you kick him involuntarily. The quadricep muscle gets activated. That's a proprioceptive reflex. They call it proprioceptive reflex. So that's one of those like you see in that flaccid and spastic paralysis where the muscle just kind of contracts like crazy. That's one of those. And if you think about it, if you're standing, if you're just standing there and if your quadricep is not continuously activated, you just fall down because gravity will pull you down. So you can visualize how these reflexes are having also to do, and that's known, that's here described in postural tone, with keeping our body upright and together without always having to think about it. And so some of that is done by these lower motor neuron reflexes that just are ongoingly. And you can see that right here described again with all the fancy labels and all that. Another reflex that we have is the sensory motor reflex. That's a little bit different. That's the one when you sneeze. So you get small irritations in the nose and all of a sudden you go, gee. And that is because of the phenomenon of summation. And summation, well, is kind of what it says. It says the sum of all impulses or all irritants will get too big and at some point it'll overcome the ability to withhold it, and we gotta, sneeze it out of the nose and get rid of that irritant. Then we also have pathological reflexes. And these are things where let's say the Babinski is like this interesting one. Like when a baby is born and you strike it right here with a sharp object, with a tickly object or something, it does this. It spreads the toes up and out. But as soon as the baby starts walking, that would be really hard to walk. Whenever you strike the floor, which is kind of like striking here, your toes would curl up. You couldn't really walk that well. It would be kind of difficult. So at that point, that reflex switches, and instead of the toes going up, they now point downward. Downward. There you go. Because we want to grab the ground when we walk. So we want to be grounded. But if that is not the case, then now this reflex in an adult or person that walks will become pathological and will have a problem. It indicates that there is a lesion going on and we need to work on that. So that's kind of cool. The Babinski reflex is sort of the famous one of those. And then what I also put here is a slide of the cross-extensor reflex. And this is kind of interesting. So you visualize yourself. This picture here is like somebody grabs your arm and yanks on it. And what happens? On the side where the arm gets yanked, the flexor gets strong and pulls away. But on the other side, on the opposite side, to balance out, the extensors get activated, and instead of bending their arm there to pull away from that irritant, you extend the arm and reach it out and straighten out the elbow. And that's kind of cool because if you think about, for example, you stepping on a tack and you hurt your toe place where the toe hurts, you want to lift that up. But the other leg, you got to push down because otherwise you're going to fall. And so that's sort of what they describe as that cross-extensor reflex. And we'll talk more about that in class to clarify that. But I think that's pretty cool. And then from there, we're going to go to a nerve plexus. What is a nerve plexus? Muscles that are innervated by nerves from multiple cord levels. The anterior rami of spinal nerves intersect and rearrange themselves in a peripheral nerve, which then innervates the muscle. Blah, 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 blah. What that basically means is when we have a muscle, like let's say the biceps right here. The biceps, if the biceps only fed by one level of nerve energy, and then think about we have a herniation, and that's the place where we have that nerve not work anymore. That muscle here will go right into flaccid paralysis, like we just discussed. Now that's going to be a problem because then that arm is useless at that point. Now, how would it be if that muscle gets innervated by multiple levels of the spinal cord. That's good enough, 3 of them. And then those levels go through a peripheral nerve and feed the biceps muscle. If then one of those get damaged, the other ones will still work. And the other ones will still help the muscle work at least somewhat. And so that's where we have these plexi. That's why we have these nerve plexi from in the spinal cord. And we got other plexuses too, but this is the one I'm talking about here right now, this type. And so of the spinal cord plexi, we got one in the neck, a cervical one. That innervates the neck and the shoulder. A specific nerve from there is the phrenic nerve, and that actually controls the diaphragm. That's that main breathing muscle right here under the rib cage, that helps you breathe. Then the brachial plexus is the biggest one we got. And that feeds the shoulder girdle and the upper extremities. And that goes, well, I shouldn't necessarily say the biggest. This is just the most complicated one. And that rearrange. Look at all this rearranging. All these things come out of here, and then they go rearrange all around, and then at some point they become peripheral nerves. And the peripheral nerves here, I listed them up. The ulnar, musculocutaneous is a big one, median and radial nerves. These are big nerves in the upper extremities. And then down here, we got a couple of plexi. We got the lumbar and the sacral plexus that we often look at together, and they supply the lower trunk and the lower extremities. And the sciatic nerve here, you probably heard of sciatica. The sciatic nerve here is the lowest, the biggest one down here. It's like the thickness of a finger, a middle finger. So it's very, very big and flat. It goes right here, down the back of the leg. But we don't necessarily have sciatica when we have low back pain. We have sciatica when our pain reaches below the leg. That's what they call sciatica. Below the knee. That's what they call sciatica. Okay, that's for plexi. That's a little breezing through on that. And that brings us then to the nerves that don't come out of the spinal cord, but the ones that come out of the brain stem. And that discussion is held when we talk about cranial nerves. And we got 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Some of them have only sensory fibers in them. Some of them have only motor fibers in them. And lots of them have both fibers in them. If we look at the only sensory fibers here, we look at actually the special senses. We look at olfaction, which is smell. We look at vision. That's the optic nerve. And then the other one we're looking at is the vestibulocochlear nerve. And that has to do with hearing and with equilibrium. So that's kind of like these special senses that we got. And so those only feed information into the brain. Their smelling doesn't really have a motor component. It's only feeling what we smell. Same with vision. And then we got a few that only have motor functions. And a lot of those have to do with neck muscle movements and also eye muscle movements. So the eye muscle is interesting. We're going to talk about the different eye muscles in the next chapter. But we got a nerve here, the trochlear nerve, that carries that goes to one specific eye muscle, known as the superior oblique eye muscle. We will talk about them in the next chapter, but here it stands. And then the other nerve that only goes to an eye muscle is the abducens nerve. And the abducens nerve only goes to what's known as the lateral rectus eye muscle. Very specific. Then we got a couple more. We got the hypoglossal nerve. Right here, sorry, I had to look for it for 12 first. And that goes to the muscles of the tongue. That helps us make speech. And then we also got this nerve called the spinal accessory or only accessory nerve, and that goes to the muscles of the neck, the trapezium and the sternocleidomastoid. And if you think about, those are the most superficial neck muscles, and they help move the neck around quickly and fast, and need to react very fast. And then the rest of the nerves are mixed nerves. So when you look at the first one here, the oculomotor nerve, what does that do? It goes to other muscles of the eye that move the eye muscle around. It goes to the muscle that raises the eyelid. It goes to also fibers that help work with the pupillary sphincter muscles, and those constrict the pupils. And when you think of constricting the pupils, you make them smaller. You think of a cat, right? You put a lot of eye in a cat and it gets smaller. That's a parasympathetic nerve energy or nerve impulse that comes from the system of rest and digest. We'll talk about that in the next part right here. But all these fibers that go to the autonomic nervous system are going to be parasympathetic. So they're all helping us more relax and digest. Then another nerve is the cranial nerve number 5. That has to do with facial sensation, so that's a sensory thing. But then it has a motor component, and that's muscles of mastication. So that's muscles that we can eat with. Then the next one we want to look at is the facial nerve, number 7. That's taste, tongue taste. We have a couple of nerves that carry taste into the central nervous system. And also from that's it for the sensory end of things. And then the facial nerve is the muscles of the face go there. So all the facial expression muscles that we talked about are innervated by the facial nerve. And the next one are fibers that go to the salivary glands. We have a couple of cranial nerves that go to the salivary glands, and those are activated when we're trying to eat. So that's rest and digest part of the nervous system. The glossopharyngeal nerve is the other nerve where we have taste on the tongue, and it also goes to a salivary gland. There's 3 main salivary glands. The facial goes to 2 of them, the glossopharyngeal to the other one. And then here, last and not least, I'm touching on the vagus nerve. And the vagus is an interesting nerve because that goes all the way into the thoracic and abdominal cavity. So it travels through the body and innervates organs far away from its origin that way. And that's because it carries these parasympathetic fibers to those organs that then slow down heart rate, increase digestion, all that stuff that we get with the rest and digest part of that autonomic nervous system. It's just the autonomic nervous system structure is such that the fight or flight component comes out of a different place in the central nervous system than the rest and digest component does. And the rest and digest component, the chill out part of the nervous system, where we try to be relaxed, comes out of the brain and then down into the sacrum. And so that's why all the fibers from the autonomic nervous system that come out of the cranium are parasympathetic fibers. Anyway, so the parasympathetic energy that the internal organs need is carried by the vagus nerve. And that's a big deal because that's one nerve carrying a lot of stuff through the body. All right, and then the other thing we have in the vagus nerve is the swallowing, and then also speech muscles are also involved there. Cool. I know that's a lot of stuff, that cranial nerve thing. But it's really interesting. And it's, the names are complex. You don't have to study them for me, but there is mnemonics for that. What's most important, in my opinion, is understanding the function of these things. I like this slide a lot. It's good to print it out because it just has the nice visuals that show us what nerve does how, but not in a descriptive format.